Monday, or actually happy Tuesday. I'm recording this on Monday. I hope you all had a good Memorial Day weekend. I know it was really nice out. I hope that you all got a chance to spend a little bit of time outside, either, maybe grilling or with some family and friends, or just, hanging out at home. Miss all of you a lot, and I hope that we can finish up these next few weeks here and finish on a strong note. It is so crazy that you are almost done with third grade and you're going to be going on to fourth grade. But I'm really, really proud of the work that I'm seeing so far. And I think this last bit of chapters that we put together for holes with the flip grid and the assignment, it looked so good, and I am so happy to move forward into these next few chapters, and I'm going to kind of explain what we're going to do here, and then we'll go from there. So it's going to be a normal couple days here. I'm going to be reading these chapters 21 through 24, and then Ms. Nair is going to be reading the next three. While we're doing this, you're going to have just an assignment like this. One thing I want us to focus on is please, please, please make sure that your answers here are not one word. If I say, chapter 21, why do you think Zero finishes Stanley's hole for him? You'll see in this chapter, in chapter 21, that's what happens. Why do you think this happened? Don't just tell me, I think they're friends. In centers at school, I always talk about how we want to make sure that we're putting in our full effort with sentences and making them almost a paragraph answer. For these ones, for a question like, why do you think Zero finishes Stanley's hole for him? You don't need to give me, 5, 6 sentences, but make sure that you're giving me more than one word. Explain to me, why would Zero do that for Stanley? What is Stanley doing for Zero? We're going to learn about that as well. So as we go through here, I've provided some pictures to kind of give you some background into what's going on. But we are going to see a really, really interesting shift here in these chapters. We are going to see, you're going to look at this and say, whoa, who are these characters? And why does it look like they're in the past? In this chapter, in chapter 23, the author pulls us back into the past and does a flashback of what Camp Green Lake was like before it dried up. This is an incredibly important part of this book. This explains a lot about why Camp Green Lake is the way it is right now. Something happens at Camp Green Lake. And as a result, it connects to Zero and Stanley, and it really helps explain the mystery that we're going to be diving into here. We're about halfway done with the book, but pay particular attention to this flashback scene right here. If you have any questions about the flashback scenes, or you have any questions about who's who, feel free to come to office hours and let me know, or ask questions. I'd be happy to explain. I've gotten some questions from people asking if they can start off by watching parts of the movie at this point. I'll tell you this. I don't want you to watch the movie all the way through until we get towards the end. We're about halfway through right now. But if you want to, and you think it'll help you, if you want to watch part of the movie, it's on Disney Plus. If you want to watch some of the chapters after you've listened to me read, that's fine too, if you think it'll help you. Again, not required yet, but if you think it'll help you, feel free to do that. So what your assignment's going to look like is you're going to see it right here. You're going to have your chapter questions. My video that you're watching right now is going to be here. Then you're going to have a flip grid. Going to the flip grids looked so good last week, and I'm so happy that people figured it out. I have loved watching your answers. I'm going to start responding to some of them. And I love that you all have kind of responded to each other's too. I know Manny was doing that. That's awesome. Feel free to use Flipgrid however you want. It's fun. In this set of chapters, I want you to tell me your name, tell me who your favorite character is, or who your favorite characters are, and why. And then answer this question. Why do you think the author is telling us what Camp Green Lake was like 100 years ago? Why might this be important to the story? Really think about that. Why is the author giving us a flashback into the past? Why would he do that? So just something to think about. You're going to answer right here. You're going to go through and you're going to log in again with your CPS account. And yeah, so let me know if you have any questions about that. But it looked like people had a pretty good hang of it. So again, if you have any questions, come to office hours. Let me know. Send me a message, a direct message, a comment. An in-person office hours thing is great too. But just let me know. So without further ado, Chapter 21. It was a long walk back to his hole. Stanley looked out through the haze of heat and dirt at the other boys, lowering and raising their shovels. Group D was the farthest away. He realized that once again he would have been digging long after everyone else had quit. He hoped he'd finished before Mr. Sir recovered because he didn't want to be out there alone with Mr. Sir. He won't die, the warden said, unfortunately for you. Walking across the desolate wasteland, Stanley thought about his great-grandfather. Not the pig stealer, but the pig stealer's son, the one who was robbed by Kissin Cape Barlow. He tried to imagine how he must have felt after Kissin Cape Barlow had left him stranded in the desert. It probably wasn't a whole lot different from the way he himself felt now. Cape Barlow had left his great-grandfather to face the hot, barren desert. The warden had left Stanley to face Mr. Sir. Somehow, his great-grandfather had survived for 17 days before he was rescued by a couple of rattlesnake hunters. He was insane when they found him. When he asked how he'd lived so long, he said he found refuge on God's thumb. He spent nearly a month in a hospital. He ended up marrying one of the nurses. No one ever knew what he meant by God's thumb, including himself. Stanley heard a twitching sound. He stopped in mid-step and with one foot still in the air. A rattlesnake lay coiled beneath his foot. Its tail was pointing upward, rattling. Stanley backed his leg away and turned and ran. The rattlesnake didn't chase after him. It rattled its tail to warn him to stay away. Thanks for the warning, Stanley whispered as he felt his heart pounded. The rattlesnake would be a lot more dangerous if it didn't have a rattle. Hey, caveman, called Armpit, you're still alive. What'd the warden say? Asked X-Ray. What'd you tell her? Asked Magnet. I told her I stole the seeds, said Stanley. Good going, said Magnet. What'd she do? Asked Zigzag. Stanley shrugged one shoulder. Nothing. She got mad at Mr. Sir for bothering her. He didn't feel like going into details. If he didn't talk about it, then maybe it didn't happen. He went over to his hole, and to his surprise, it was almost finished. He stared at it, amazed. It didn't make sense. Or perhaps it did. He smiled. Since he had taken the blame for the sunflower seeds, he realized the other boys dug his hole for him. Hey, thanks, he said. Don't look at me, said X-Ray. Confused, Stanley looked around from Magnet to Armpit to Zigzag to Squid. None of them took credit for it. Then he turned to Zero, who had been quietly digging in his hole since Stanley's return. Zero's hole was smaller than all the others. Alright, so if Zero's hole was smaller than all the others, what can we infer about that? If Zero is so good at digging these holes, but his is smaller than the others, what do we think Zero did for Stanley? I want you to think about that. Chapter 22. Stanley was the first one finished. He spat in his hole, then showered and changed into his cleaner set of clothes. It had been 3 days since the laundry was done. So even his clean set was dirty and smelly. Tomorrow these would become his work clothes, and the other set would be washed. He could think of no reason why Zigzag would dig a hole for him. Zero didn't even get any of the sunflower seeds. I guess he likes to dig holes, Armpit had said. He's a mole, Zigzag had said. I think he eats the dirt. Moles don't eat dirt, X-Ray pointed out. Worms eat dirt. Hey, Zero, Squid had asked, are you a mole or a worm? Zero had said nothing. Stanley never even thanked him, but now he sat on his cot and waited for Zero to return from the shower room. Thanks, he said to Zero as he entered through the tent flap. Zero glanced at him, then went over to the crates where they deposited the dirty clothes and towels. Why'd you help me? Stanley asked. Zero turned around. You didn't steal the sunflower seeds, he said. So, neither did you, said Stanley. Zero stared at him. His eyes seemed to expand, and it was almost as if Zero were looking right through him. You didn't steal the sneakers, he said. Stanley said nothing. He watched Zero walk out of the tent. If anybody had X-ray vision, it was Zero. Wait! He called and then hurried out after him. Zero had stopped just outside the tent, and Stanley almost ran to him. I'll try to teach you to read if you want, Stanley offered. I don't know if I know how to teach, but I'm not that worn out today, since you dug a lot of my hole. A big smile spread across Zero's face. They returned to the tent, where they were less likely to be bothered. Stanley got his box of stationery and a pen out of the crate. They sat on the ground. You know the alphabet? Stanley asked. For a second, he thought he saw a flash of defiance in Zero's eyes, but then it passed. I think I know some of it, Zero said. A, B, C, D. Keep going, said Stanley. Zero's eyes looked upward. E, F, said Stanley. G, said Zero. He blew air out of the side of his mouth. H, I, K, P? Hijkl, Stanley said. That's right, said Zero. I've heard that before. I just don't have it memorized exactly. That's all right, said Stanley. Here, I'll say the whole thing just to kind of refresh your memory, and then you can try it. He recited the alphabet for Zero, and then Zero repeated it without making a single mistake. Not bad for a kid who had never seen Sesame Street. Well, I've heard it before somewhere, said Zero. I've heard it before somewhere, Zero said, trying to act like it was nothing, but his big smile gave him away. The next step was harder. Stanley had to figure out how to teach him to recognize each letter. He gave Zero a piece of paper and took a piece for himself. I guess we'll start with A. He printed a capital A, and Zero copied it onto a sheet of paper. The paper wasn't lined, which made it more difficult, but Zero's A wasn't bad, just a little big. Stanley told him he needed to write smaller, or else they'd run out of paper really quick. Zero printed it smaller. Actually, there are 2 ways to write each letter, Stanley said, but then he realized this was going to be harder than he thought. See, that's a capital A, but usually you'll see a small a. You only have to put capitals at the beginning of the word, or if it's the start of a sentence, or if it's a proper noun like a name. Zero nodded as if he understood, but Stanley knew he made very little sense. So he printed a lowercase a and Zero copied it. So there's 52, said Zero. Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. So instead of 26 letters, there's really 52. Stanley looked at him surprised. I guess that's right. How'd you figure that out? He asked. Zero said nothing. Did you add? Zero said nothing. Did you multiply? That's just how many there are, said Zero. Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. He didn't even know how Zero knew there were 26 in the first place. Did he count them as he recited them? He said he had Zero write a few more upper and lowercase a's, and then he moved on to the capital B. This was going to take a long time, he realized. You can teach me 10 letters a day, suggested Zero, 5 capital and 5 smalls. After 5 days, I'll know all of them, except the last day I'll have to do 12, 6 capitals and 6 smalls. Again, Stanley stared at him, amazed that he was able to figure all that out. Zero must have thought that he was staring for a different reason, because he said, I'll dig part of your hole every day. I dig for about an hour, and then you can teach me for an hour. And since I'm a faster digger anyway, our holes will get done at the same time. I won't have to wait for you. Okay, Stanley agreed. As Zero was printing his B's, Stanley asked him how he figured out it would take 5 days. Did you multiply? Did you divide? That's just what it is, Zero said. It's good math, said Stanley. I'm not stupid, Zero said. I know everyone thinks I am. I just don't like answering their questions. Later that night, as he lay on his cot, Stanley reconsidered the deal that he had made with Zero. Getting a break every day would be a relief, but he knew X-Ray wouldn't like it. He wondered if there might be a way for Zero to agree to dig part of X-Ray's hole as well. But then again, why would he? I'm the one teaching Zero. I need the break so I'll have the energy to teach him. I'm the one who took the blame for the sunflower seeds. I'm the one who Mr. Sir is mad at. He closed his eyes, and the images from the warden's cabin floated inside his head. Her red fingernails, Mr. Sir writhing on the floor. Her flowered makeup kit. He opened his eyes. He suddenly realized where he'd seen the gold tubes before. He'd seen them at his mother's bathroom, and he'd seen them again in the warden's cabin. It was half a lipstick container. KB. KB. He felt a jolt of astonishment. His mouth silently formed the name Kate Barlow, as he wondered if it really could have belonged to the kissin' outlaw. All right, so this is an important chapter. We realize that Stanley and Zero have a deal made, and that Zero's not stupid. Zero's really, really good at something, actually. He's really, really good with numbers. Um, and he just doesn't know how to read. So this is going to be an interesting journey to see if Stanley can actually teach Zero something as difficult as reading. Stanley's not a teacher. Stanley's just a boy at Camp Green Lake. So do you think he's going to be able to teach him how to read? We also have a really important last part here where Stanley realizes that the lipstick container probably belonged to Kate Barlow. And we know that Kate Barlow was kissing Kate Barlow, who was an outlaw. And an outlaw is someone who's kind of like a cowboy or a bank robber back in the old days. So we're going to learn a lot about her in this next chapter. This is the flashback chapter, so pay attention. Chapter 23. Imagine that this is taking place in the past now. 110 years ago, Camp Green Lake was the largest lake in Texas. It was full of clear, cool water, and it sparkled like a giant emerald in the sun. It was especially beautiful in the spring, when the peach trees which lined the shore bloomed with pink and rose-colored blossoms. There was always a town picnic on the 4th of July. They'd play games, dance, sing, and swim in the lake to keep cool. Prizes were awarded for the best peach pie and peach jam. A special prize was given every year to Miss Catherine Barlow for her famous spiced peaches. No one else had tried to make the spiced peaches because they knew none could be as delicious as hers. Every summer, Miss Catherine would pick up bushels of peaches and preserve them in jars with cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and other spices, which she kept secret. The jarred peaches would last all winter. They probably would have lasted longer than that, but they were always eaten by the end of winter. It was said that Camp Green Lake was heaven on earth, and that Miss Catherine's spiced peaches were food for the angels. Catherine Barlow was the town's only school teacher. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse. It was old even then. The roof leaked, the windows wouldn't open, and the door hung crooked on its bent hinges. She was a wonderful teacher, full of knowledge and life. The children loved her. She taught classes in the evening for adults, and many adults loved her as well. She was very pretty. Her classes were often full of young men, who were a lot more interested in the teacher than they were in getting an education. But all they got was an education. One such young man was Trout Walker. His real name was Charles Walker, but everyone called him Trout because his 2 feet smelled like a couple of dead fish. This wasn't entirely Trout's fault. He had an incurable foot fungus. In fact, it was the same foot fungus that 110 years later would afflict the famous ball player Clyde Livingston. But at least Clyde showered every day. I take a bath every Sunday morning, Trout would brag, whether I need to or not. Most everyone in the town of Camp Green Lake expected Miss Catherine to marry Trout Walker. He was the son of the richest man in the county. His family owned most of the peach trees and all the land on the east side of the lake. Trout often showed up at night school but never paid attention. He talked in class and was disrespectful of the students around him. He was loud and stupid. A lot of men in town were not educated. That didn't bother Miss Catherine. She knew they'd spend most of their lives working on farms and ranches and hadn't seen much schooling. That was why she was there, to teach them. But Trout didn't want to learn. He seemed to be proud of his stupidity. "How'd you like to take a ride on my new boat this Saturday?" he asked her one evening after class. "No, thank you," said Miss Catherine. "We got a brand new boat," he said. "You don't even have to row it." "Yes, I know," said Miss Catherine. Everyone in town had seen and heard the Walkers' new boat. It made a horrible loud noise and spewed ugly black smoke over the beautiful lake. Trout had always gotten everything he wanted. He found it hard to believe that Miss Catherine turned him down. He pointed his finger and said, "No one ever says no to Charles Walker." "I believe I just did," said Catherine Barlow. All right, so we see in this chapter that this is a flashback, obviously. And in this flashback, we are going back to a couple hundred years ago when Camp Green Lake was a lake. It was a real lake in Texas. We know that this lake eventually dried up and became Camp Green Lake like we know it today, with the desert and the yellow spotted lizards. But before, it seemed beautiful. They celebrated 4th of July. They grew peaches. There were kids in schools. There was a lake with water. Um, so we know that something must have happened then. Something happened um, that caused it to dry up and become what it is today. We know that Catherine Barlow is a teacher. And she teaches kids, but at night she also teaches adults how to read. And it's mostly the boys who want to learn how to read. Um, Not boys, but older men in the town who want to read. But they just kind of want to go to the class that she's teaching. They don't really care about learning to read. And the one who is very kind of disrespectful to her is Charles Trout Walker. And we're going to see later on that Trout Walker, even though he's rich, he's not very good to Catherine Barlow. And a few other people in the town. And I'm going to leave it at that because it was kind of a cliffhanger here. We do have one more chapter, though. And now chapter 24 is taking us back forward into the future. We are now back at modern Camp Green Lake with Stanley and the boys. Chapter 24. Stanley was half asleep as he got in line for breakfast, but the sight of Mr. Sir awakened him. The left side of Mr. Sir's face had swollen to the size of half a cantaloupe. There were 3 dark purple jagged lines running down his cheek where the warden had scratched him. The other boys in Stanley's tent had obviously seen Mr. Sir as well, but they had the good sense not to say anything. Stanley put a carton of juice and a plastic spoon on his tray. He kept his eyes down and hardly breathed as Mr. Sir ladled some oatmeal-like stuff into his bowl. He brought his tray to the table. Behind him, a boy from one of the other tents said, "Hey, what happened to your face?" There was a crash. Stanley turned to see Mr. Sir holding the boy's head against the oatmeal pot. "Is there something wrong with my face?" The boy tried to speak but couldn't. Mr. Sir had him by the throat. "Does anyone see anything wrong with my face?" asked Mr. Sir as he continued to choke the boy. No one said anything. Mr. Sir let the boy go. His head banged against the table and he fell to the ground. Mr. Sir stood over him and asked, "How does my face look to you now?" A gurgling sound came from the boy's mouth. Then he managed to gasp the word, "Fine." "I'm kind of handsome, don't you think?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." Out on the lake, the other boys asked Stanley what he knew about Mr. Sir's face, but he just shrugged and dug his hole. If he didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. He worked as hard and as fast as he could, not trying to pace himself. He just wanted to get off the lake and away from Mr. Sir as soon as possible. Besides, he knew he'd get a break. "Whenever you're ready, just let me know," Zero had said. The first time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pandansky. The second time, Mr. Sir was driving. No one had anything except "Thank you, Mr. Sir," as he filled each canteen. No one even dared to look at his grotesque face. As Stanley waited, he ran his tongue over the roof of his mouth and inside his cheeks. His mouth was as dry and as parched as the lake. The bright sun reflected off the side of the mirror of the truck, and Stanley had to yield it with his eyes. Shield his eyes with his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," said Magnet as he took the canteen. "You thirsty, caveman?" Mr. Sir asked. "Yes, Mr. Sir," Stanley said, handing the canteen to him. Stanley opened the nozzle and water flooded out of the tank, but it didn't go into Stanley's canteen. Instead, he held the canteen right next to the stream of water. Stanley watched the water splatter off the dirt, where it was quickly absorbed by the thirsty ground. Mr. Sir let the water run for about 30 seconds, then stopped. "You want more?" he asked. Stanley didn't say anything. Mr. Sir turned the water back on, and again Stanley watched it pour into the dirt. "There, should be plenty." He handed Stanley an empty canteen. Stanley stared at the dark spot on the ground, which quickly shrank before his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," he said. All right, so Mr. Sir does something there that's not very nice to Stanley. And he does that because of the incident with the warden. And do you think it's fair that Mr. Sir did that? I don't know. Um, so I want you to complete this assignment, do your flip grid, and make sure you're doing complete sentences. Let me know if you need anything. And Miss Nair will be posting her chapters later on this week. See you, everybody.